Good morning. As soon as you get your hard hats on, we'll start walking. Its path's a little stony, but everybody looks like they got shoes that'll tolerate it pretty well. My name is Jim Finley, and I'm the Extension Forester for Pennsylvania. We've got a few helpers along.
Dave Jackson, I'm a regional forester here, Extension Educator with Penn State.
Tim Cole, I work for DCNR Bureau of Forestry. I'm the Service Forester for Center County.
I'm Clayton Lutz. I work for the Pennsylvania Game Commission. I'm what we call a diversity biologist. Work primarily with non-game species and species that are in decline.
And I'm Andy Duncan. I'm the private Forestland Stewardship Coordinator in Pennsylvania for the Bureau of Forestry.
So we'll start walking, okay?
We got a little bit of a walk for you. Like Jim said, it's a stony trail.
All right. The younger generation gave it a thumbs up. How about the older generation? It was okay?
You survived it.
All right. Well, we got a little bit more to do.
They don't call this Rock Springs for nothing.
And if you need any rocks, I mean, we'd be happy to accommodate you. How many of you have been on this tour before, the Woodlot before? I shouldn't say this tour, because I think it's the first time we've ever brought people up this far.
Mm-hmm. How old was I?
Oh, I remember you. You were about that tall. Okay, if you've been on a tour before, one of the things that we often talk about are sort of our objectives for this particular woodlot. And one of the things that, there are three things we tend to look at. One, we manage it for income and try to generate some income to manage the woodlot, to pay for roads and the kinds of things we do in here. Two, we try to cut firewood out of the woodlot, and our goal is to cut about 4 to 10 cords of firewood a year out of here. We take most of that from live trees. We want to keep the dead component in the stand because of wildlife questions, and Clay will talk a little bit about that when we get over the riparian area. Two, we find that, you know, you've cut a dead tree, all you've done is cut a dead tree. If you cut a live tree, you've reallocated the resources to another live tree so that it can take advantage of those resources and grow better. And so we get to make decisions about which trees come and stay. The third objective is wildlife, and I have a particular passion for grouse, and so a lot of the things that we do in here are for grouse. And so, you know, we manage some grapevines, we try to get some early successional cover and those kinds of things. And finally, we manage it as an educational resource to try to show people the kinds of things that we can do. In the past, we generally said we own 30 acres of woodlands here. We've now become larger landowners. We're in the process of rewriting our management plan, and we just sort of usurped some additional land area. Particularly to the north, there's some old fields and things that we've taken over. We've extended our woodlot a little further east. And so now we call ourselves a 100-acre landowner. We're getting really big now. And it's kind of an interesting number because in Pennsylvania, we've got about 740,000 private landowners that we've been able to identify and estimate. And only about 25,000 of those landowners own 100 acres or more. And so we're now moved into this bigger realm of landowners. The average landowner only owns about 16 acres. So what our talk about this year is about what we're doing to a particular 15-acre part of our woodlot. For the past couple of years, we've been noticing that hemlock woolly adelgid has been in here. Hemlock woolly adelgid is an insect that feeds on hemlock. It has a feeding mouth part where it pierces right at the base of the needle and sucks the fluids out of the twig and out of the needle. It causes it to dry and die, and it's pretty hard on hemlock.
Why don't I pass these around? As you look at the base of the needles there, you see kind of a white cottony mass there, and so that's where the female would have had the eggs earlier on this spring in the early summer. So tip the branches over and you can see some kind of white cottony fuzz there, and we'll just let you pass these around while Jim continues to introduce you to what we're doing here. Take a sample there, and you can see.
Does this stuff spread if I would take it home?
Yes.
Yes. It might spread
bad idea.
It might
Bad
spread
idea.
on our clothing even. And But it's pretty much already all across Pennsylvania, so.
Yeah, there's a handout back at the tent if you're interested in learning more about the hemlock woolly adelgid. It has three generations. The first generation that matures in June actually has 2 generations within it. One generation goes back to hemlock and one generation goes to spruce. The one that goes to spruce just sort of disappears and we don't tend to worry about it. But the one that comes back to hemlock will come back and oviposit, hatch out in July. It'll feed a little bit this time of year and then it goes dormant. Then it starts feeding again in the fall, goes through its life cycle, oviposits again and puts eggs out and develops more cottony mass. Generally, hemlock will survive 3 to maybe 6-7 years with heavy feeding. And some of the research is now indicating that some hemlock may actually recover.
So you can see this one, how, hemlock would maintain its needles low on down in the crown, but you can see all the needles are completely off of this tree here, and that's all from adelgid feeding on it and desiccating the tree. So it's really weather dependent sometimes too, what the impact is going to be on the tree. So real dry summers can really stress the tree even more with the insect on it.
And we had a dry summer. And we've had, I think, about 5 in a row at this point. And so we've lost most of the hemlock in here. We estimated the mortality in here is pushing 80%, probably go as high as 90% before it's all done. And so looking at what we had in our decision variables, we decided we'd come in here and harvest the hemlock out of it. At the same time, we decided we'd harvest some of the hardwood trees out of it. And so we marked it 15 acres for retention. And if you look, the trees that we have blue stripes on are trees we're going to keep.
And you're standing right on a border of it right there. So the vertical lines are the boundary of the sale area with some pink ribbons. But as you look back this way, you can see a couple trees right up here behind me that are marked with the slashes. Those are the trees that we are retaining. So everything that you don't see blue paint on is going to be harvested in here.
What will be the effect on the inventory of the ferns when you harvest all of those?
Well, we hope to kill the ferns.
The ferns would probably increase if we didn't get regeneration in here right away, or ability to grow up through that fern. So we're going to probably treat it this week, actually, since it's still nice and green and we can treat the foliage. The fern is a competitor with what we're trying to regenerate in here. So we're going to leave some nice trees that we marked here, quite a variety of species, Jim. I don't recall exactly what.
12.
There's 12 different species that we had left for retention. Average diameter was about 22 inches, so some good sized trees that we left.
Yeah, the average tree that we left, and you can look on the back of this handout. There are a couple of statistics we want to share with you. On 15 acres, on the table we have there, we retained 327 trees. That's not counting 26 trees that we marked as wildlife. So we actually retained about 350, 360 trees in the whole stand. Basal area is a way that we measure tree density, and that's a cross-sectional area of the tree measured at DBH, or diameter breast height, 4.5 feet off the ground, and then converted to square feet. This stand, before cutting, varied around 200 to 250 square feet of basal area, and we're bringing it down to about 58. So we're cutting about 3/4 of the stocking in this stand, and it's a pretty heavy cut, which is going to move us to a regeneration kind of a situation, because we're going to have high shade, but we're going to have a lot of light on the floor, which will bring us back to your ferns in a minute. Okay. Our average tree diameter is 21.6 inches. That's an amazingly large tree to be retaining. And so when we get over to the cutting, you're going to see it looks kind of park-like. It's kind of an interesting kind of a thing. The average tree volume is 408 board feet.
Tremendous.
That's really, really high. The average house uses about 10,000 board feet of lumber to build it. So, about 22 trees or so of that diameter would build the average house.
What diameter was that again?
21 inches.
And we aged the trees that were harvested over here, and right at almost exactly 100 years of age. We counted 3 stumps, growth rings on them, and we came with 99 years, I think, on every
And
single
100.
one. We did have one 100, yeah.
yeah.
So we're right at 100 years of age. There was a second age class in here from a previous harvest that we did count one stump that was 150 years old. And it looked as though it was a suppressed tree when it was harvested, 150 years ago. And that tree was left. The growth rings got larger, and then they got more crowded again. And that one we were able to count 150 years on. So quite an old stand, really. So that gives you an idea of what we're leaving here. And like Jim said, there's 12 different species out here. And those are going to be our trees that are going to provide us with seed source to help us get regeneration on the site. So we're keeping the best, and we're keeping a variety of trees to get a diversity of species back on the site here. And we're keeping enough volume on the site that we could come back and do another harvest. You see the final volume of those trees that were left, those 327 trees, 133,000 board feet. So quite a high amount of volume. Now we wouldn't come back and harvest all those, but we certainly would harvest the majority of those to release the regeneration that we hope to get established over the next 5 years or so.
So that brings us back to regeneration. Ferns, particularly these ferns, which tend to arrive from individual rhizomes, and if you look back in there, you'll see that the fronds come up individually, sort of scattered around, as opposed to this fern, which is a clump fern. This is New York fern, and this is hay-scented fern. And there are three ferns that we really are concerned about with regeneration in Pennsylvania: hay-scented, New York, and bracken. And all three of those fern species spread by rhizomes. A little bit, they send out a root and then they send up a top. There's a couple things to know about ferns and any kind of competition. The closer shade is to the ground, the more competitive it is. It's denser because the sun casts more of a shadow as things get closer to the ground. If I got a really high canopy, light gets through and it kind of gets dispersed. And so light can still get to the forest floor. But if I'm a seedling trying to figure out how to grow up through ferns, and ferns become very thick, they, one, create heavy shade, but two, they take away the best light. And so they reflect green, which I don't really need, and they absorb the reds, the blues, the violets, and the oranges, which I do need to grow. And so seedlings that try to establish themselves underneath ferns really have a hard time expressing themselves above the ferns. And so we want to control the ferns. And so in the next week, as Dave said, we'll come in here by hand and we'll spray out all the patches of ferns within the boundaries of the timber sale. So
we also controlled some other competing plants in here that would interfere with our ability to regenerate this stand too. And up the top of the hill here we have a good understory of striped maples established. And last fall I did a herbicide treatment on the striped maple to get those out of the way. And also, if you look over here, there were some huge grapevines in here, and where we thought that they were going to be cut and down on the ground, and they can climb right over the new seedlings and regeneration established. I also treated a number of the grapevines that were in. I didn't treat all of them because we do like to keep some in here, but I did treat a number of the big grapevines that were in here that were up in the tops of the trees. So those are going to come down when he cuts those trees. And then they're going to be a problem as they grow over the new regeneration. So we also treated some of the grapevine in here as well.
Let's go for a walk. One of the things that you're always concerned about when you're harvesting in a woodlot are your streams and the water quality issues. And right here there's a spring seep. And this spring seep, I've been working in a woodlot. If you look at the first paragraph, it says 26 years we've been working in here. Actually, I subtracted wrong. That should be 36.
Oh, really? Got another decade.
I got another whole decade on there. So for 36 years we've been working in here, and this spring seep, in 36 years, as dry as it's ever gotten, I've never seen it go dry. It always flows water. So this is a really critical piece of habitat. And so Clay, you're just seeing it. So
you can see the ribbons. We did mark it all off. You can see the orange flag and some white spots of paint, and it's on both sides of the stream. So this is going to be a buffer. This is going to be a no-cut zone where he won't have equipment in there. So any of the trees that you see in here are going to be left standing. So, and we'll point out, there's certainly going to be some dead hemlock in here. This one, and that one, and etc. So And actually, I just noticed a great big grapevine on the back on that tree right behind you guys there. So that tree will probably be even left standing.
Grapevines up in this one too.
Yeah, grapevine on this one too. So I don't know if you want to mention this, Clay, as far as the riparian buffer zones and what kind of benefits. I know when we were moving a lot of these stones and stuff here, working this path, we saw a lot of salamanders and stuff in here.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of real important things to touch on here. One is water quality and hydrology. You know, retaining the trees around here is going to provide shade, which is going to keep this water source cold, which is important because this water is going to flow right down into Spruce Creek, which is an important cold water fishery and a cold water habitat, which then flows into the Little Juniata River, which is a recovering river and is really quite on the rebound and doing well. So that goes down into the Susquehanna, which goes into the Chesapeake Bay. So decisions they're making here really are trickling through the whole watershed. And it seems kind of simple and trivial, but that's really what we need to do to preserve those downstream features. So that's kind of a big picture idea. Now, more localized, he mentioned salamanders. This is really important habitat for our wood salamanders, so things like mole salamanders, spring salamanders. We'll be using these features. One is travel routes, really to get around. They might breed in a vernal pool somewhere downslope, and then they'll use these riparian corridors to move around, come up and forage on these more upland areas. They'll use this downwoody debris to hide under during dry conditions. Another thing that I like about this kind of island, if you think about it, when all these trees come down, this will be a nice little island within a heavy cut area, so you'll have some diversity where you have really young forest with an island of more mature forest, and that's important for a lot of the bird species that will be using that early successional habitat to have big canopies where they can come in and forage and nest in and things like that. Also, the idea of retaining some of these hemlocks, even though they're dying in here, is really nice because some of the wildlife trees that were marked were oak and some other really hard species that a woodpecker might develop a hole in over many years, but a dying hemlock is much softer, it's going to decay faster. They'll be able to exploit these dying hemlocks for bugs and cavities in a different way than they'll exploit some of the harder trees that were
We even
left.
see that down below, folks. Some of the hemlock that have died a little bit earlier, you can see where the birds, and I'm not sure what species they might be, Clay, but the birds have literally knocked the bark off and they just show up reddish brown in the woods where they're just foraging for insects all over those dead trees that are already here.
Yeah, one of the hemlocks are really important. It's very unfortunate that this adelgid is coming into our forest. There's a lot of species that are heavily associated with hemlock forests, especially around riparian areas. They have wonderful bark that gleaners use. It's a type of foraging strategy used by birds, and they're going to go under that bark and put their bills in and get all the worms and bugs and spiders and things that are hiding out in hemlock. So we're losing that habitat because of this hemlock woolly adelgid. So it's quite unfortunate. It's difficult decisions to make as a manager because for the most part, hemlocks are a really nice system to have and keep intact, but we're losing them. So you got to make decisions on what you're going to do with your forest that you expect to come in next.
How wide is this buffer?
It's running about 50 feet.
Across.
25 on each side.
Yeah, 25 on each side.
And it really varies as you move up, or you'll see actually the little patch of a wetland where a spring flows into. We went way out and even captured that, where one of the springs actually went back underground even. And there's a lot of fingers up here, so it really varies. It's going to be, as Clay says, it's going to be an island in here. And you'll see as we move over there, it is a heavy cut. It's a regeneration cut, and this is really going to stand out in here. Is how it's going to look and what habitat it's going to provide and stream protection that it's going to provide.
As you go up the hill, it probably gets as wide as 200 feet.
Yeah. And you know, we
Because of the fingers
sacrificed a little
coming
bit
in,
of
but-
income maybe with this, but really it's insignificant to what our objectives were for managing the woodlot here, to retain this for some diversity in wildlife habitat and water quality protection.
Now, is this like a requirement of some sort, or?
Yeah, under the Pennsylvania Clean Streams Act, you have to protect riparian areas, and And so there are what we call best management practices that describe the width of buffers depending on the slope and the conditions around them. And so, you know, we've buffered this about as wide as we needed to. We could have made it a little bit wider probably, but you know, it became an economic ecology kind of a trade-off, and we've met the guidelines for the kinds of things that we need to do. And there are, you know, for this particular harvest, we had to write a soil erosion and sedimentation plan to say how we were going to take care of the soils, how we were going to buffer streams, how we were going to take care of culverts. And so all that is written up before the harvest actually began.
He won't be crossing any of this drainage. The way he's going to harvest this, he'll have a skid trail that'll come up this side of it, and he has one already that he's working on that side of it.
And then he'll be able to cross at the upper edge of it.
Yeah, at the very top. So, you know, there's culverts down here on the haul road that he brings the equipment out on, or the logs out on, that we have on our main road. That's where he's crossing it.
So Clay, I got a question for you.
Sure.
How would you feel about felling those grapevines into this riparian area?
I would say it all depends on how much you have on the landscape. If you only had this up to this tree that's probably going to be dying, and that grapevine up there is really going to win. I mean, he's going to get a lot of sunlight, produce a lot of fruit,
Right.
and be very beneficial. If that was the only one here, I'd let him up there.
Okay.
But you do have a lot of grapevine in this forest, so it's not a limiting factor. So I would make your decisions kind of based on that, how much you could tolerate, how much grapevine you expect to be in the future stand. If you think there's going to be enough light on the ground here, which there probably will just because of the mortality.
I'm going to have east and west light coming into here.
Right, and the mortality of the hemlock.
Yeah.
So yeah, you could certainly put it on, and that makes it, grapevines on the ground are more accessible to turkeys and grouse and birds that are more on the ground, as well as small mammals. Up in the canopy, more available to songbirds. So you kind of want both.
Yeah.
If you can wander over here, folks, we'll talk a little bit about the harvesting equipment that's being used out here, because it's pretty neat setup for one-man operation here.
Just tell me those snakes will pop out.
Those snakes are going to pop out of here.
There are no snakes in here right now.
No, they're honestly they're out.
They've gone.
But he's moved around here. They decided to go to the neighbors. But you can see, number one, you can see the results of the harvest.
Have you done any treatment of fern in here?
Oh, this area really didn't need any, and it really wasn't
There was
any.
a little bit of fern down in here, but
I treated some invasive shrubs over there, but that was about it, really.
Good.
And the striped maple was up across the top there that I treated. But you can see the results of what the harvest is going to look like. Every tree with the blue mark is what's retained. Now, in the harvest equipment is what's called a forwarder, and it's a one-man operation. He has a cutting head on there. I'll let Jim explain how that works here, but we just saw him take one tree down.
he's moving in to get another one here.
So he's inside the cab that's air conditioned, just moving levers and pushing buttons and such.
Can I still cover this one?
Yeah, you're welcome. You're back. What he'll do is he'll select a tree, he'll drop the cutting head around it, he'll cut it off, and then he can control the fall of that tree to put it on the ground. One thing you notice is there's relatively little damage on any of the residual trees. And then once he has a hold of that tree, he'll take it all the way to the ground, he'll retain hold on it, and he'll measure it. He'll move it through a set of wheels and measure it, and then cut it off. Pull it forward and cut it off. And so here he goes.
See it sliding forward.
See him flying, and it takes all the branches off. Now he's going to pull it back. He's going to get to the end of it, and he's going to measure it. Now watch. See him moving it forward? Now he's going to cut it.
Cut them into log length.
Yep.
And
Cuts them into log length.
he's going to make piles that way.
You can see the piles that he's got laying here.
Yeah, this is his skid trail right here that he's working off of. Going up.
And what he does is he cuts for 2 or 3 days, lays his logs out, goes down there, he changes the head. You can see there's another head laying down there, which is a grapple. So he can back up in here, he picks those all up, and in the back of that machine there's a carriage, a bunk, and he just loads the logs on it and then takes them down to the landing. So that does everything he needs to do.
He can carry about 13 ton of logs just on the back of that machine alone. And he'll come up and pick up those individual piles that he's sorted out through here and bring those down to where he can load trailers that are parked at the landing site. So trailers are full once he unloads here.
There goes another one
They
down.
come in and just drop an empty trailer and hitch up a full trailer and take it down the road to the mill, whichever place it's going to. He's making different sorts down there, so you'll see trailers with logs on them, you'll see trailers with pulpwood on it. You'll see trailers that separate the oak from the hemlock and some of the other species.
Now, this may look like a bomb went off. and this is actually okay.
Yeah, what do you think of this? What did people, when you looked at this first, were you kind of shocked to see what it looked like, or what did people think?
That's why I didn't want to get a forester and something in the log line. This is what it would look like.
Well, on 100 acres, we're going to have 15 of this. And so we're going to have some diversity. We're going to have a whole new age class in here that's going to diversify our forest considerably.
Now, before this was logged, we went through, and you can see, if you look around, you can see oak regeneration scattered around in the understory, over here next to this tree. This kind of cover is actually going to allow this thing to regenerate really well. One of the things that I've been observing over the years is when they lay down this brush like this and they make this their skid trail, what he's doing is he's pulling the tops in and he's driving over them. So he's keeping his compaction down, but he's also creating a good seed source, a seed bed here. And so seed are going to fall down in there and they're going to germinate. And so we actually see where he's skidded, where he built this trail, we get better regeneration sometimes.
And we really have to talk about light here too,
Yeah.
Jim, because light is going to be the driving factor for the species that we're trying to regenerate on there. If we don't have sufficient light to the forest floor, we don't get them back. And so by harvesting like this, we have some shade, but it's very high up in the canopy, plenty of light still filtering through the forest floor that's going to drive it to preferred species that we want to regenerate on here. And hope that we get a decent percentage of oak, but we do want to regenerate other species on here as well. But the majority of the trees that we've retained in this section just happen to be oak, but I do see some hickory.
I see some hickory.
There's basswood right here, a couple basswood.
Looks like a black gum up there with a W on it.
Yeah.
What you
There's a
mentioned
big
the W
cherry down.
before, what was that W for?
That W says that's a tree that we didn't count in our tally of volume, and we're retaining it for wildlife. It's either got a cavity or a defect in it. You know, it's something that when we looked at it said.
See one out there with a big fork on it actually there that's up about 10 or so feet.
That's a hickory.
We called that a wildlife tree, and the only reason we retained it was because it was a hickory for wildlife.
And then the black gum further up the hill had some holes in it.
Yeah.
So these are all things that we said we would retain.
And so those trees will probably never be harvested off the site here. We'll probably always leave those.
How many years before like this will
Oh, this will look pretty nice to walk through in 10 years.
It'll be very thick, probably within a couple of years. Yeah, of new growth. Yep. And 10 years of age, if this regenerates properly, we should actually be able to walk underneath the new tree.
Certainly by 15.
Yeah. Age 15, absolutely.
Could that machine cut
If we get
a
briars,
tree like this?
That machine
If you
can
take
cut
that
a big
down,
tree.
wouldn't it
It
fit the
actually has a
machine?
big saw. It's like a chainsaw with a bar and a chain on it that comes out and cuts through the tree. And he can work around different sides of the tree. But what he told us is that he wouldn't cut a high quality oak or something like that with it because of his fear of it splitting. And so when he did have some big trees, and like this red oak here was a big double trunk tree. That's why the stump is so large.
actually it was triple.
But there was a big ash over here that the stump was about 4 feet across. We took all the ash out because of the emerald ash borer. And that one he did come in, and a couple of these he came in and cut with a chainsaw just to make sure the stump didn't split or anything like that.
But a big tree doesn't really affect it. It's not going to flip that machine.
That machine weighs like 26 tons. That is a huge machine. Yeah. Now he couldn't carry it and tip it on its side and run it through it and so on like that, but he can cut it. And he can fill it directionally with that machine. Yeah.
One of the questions over here was about blackberries. As you walk around where we've created light conditions here, we do get blackberries. And blackberries, from my opinion, are a plus. Because we know there's a relationship between blackberries and ferns. And if I can get blackberries established, I don't get ferns. Well, it's either because of the way they create shade, or there's some kind of other relationship there. And blackberries are preferred deer food. And if I get a lot of blackberries, well, then I know the deer haven't overwhelmed me. The other thing is blackberries are self-thinning. So the first year a cane comes up, it doesn't produce any fruit, but it produces a lot of shade. The second year, it produces fruit and dies, and so it shades out the next crop. And so over time, blackberries will thin themselves out of a stand. And the light conditions underneath blackberries, because it's taller than ferns, are actually better than ferns. And so I can establish regeneration underneath blackberries that as they thin, will begin to move up. And so while you hate to hunt through blackberries and you hate to walk through blackberries, I like to make pies out of blackberries. And blackberries lead to good outcomes in my mind. And so blackberries are one of those things when you see them you go, hot dog, it might work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And from wildlife too. That's blackberry over fern
Any day.
all the time. Absolutely, for a lot of different reasons.
So what do you think of this play from a wildlife standpoint, what it's going to turn into here?
Yeah, I mean, some of you might have a concern of this, taking this beautiful, which is this beautiful forest here, and kind of what we all think of in our mind as pristine environment, good for wildlife, and really coming in here with a giant machine and causing havoc. But from a wildlife perspective, in the state of Pennsylvania, the habitat that we're losing the most species out of is grasslands, followed very closely by young forest. So on the landscape, we're actually trying to put more healthy young forest on the ground than we are trying to retain mature forest. Our forests across the state are maturing and getting big, which is great for some species, but those species that require a very young forest are in steep decline. So as a shelter woodcut, which this would be described as, you have species like cerulean warblers, which are in decline. They will certainly use this. Grouse, deer, things like that will respond very well as this young regeneration happens. And then once you get the overstory removal and you come in here in your second entry and take this all out, then you're talking really nice early successional young forest habitat for species like yellow-winged warblers, golden-winged warblers, blue-winged warblers, species that are in very steep declines right now. So managing your forest, foresters will always say this is good forestry is almost always good wildlife management, and that's very much true.
Anything else?
We're going to have a problem with the branches across are going to stop any erosion. Probably have
Yeah, absolutely. You look at this here and you look at you know, the ability of soil to move with this density of brush and debris on it. It's almost impossible. You know? We won't see erosion off of this. Almost impossible. We won't see erosion off of this.
One of the things you see here is, even though he's running a heavy machine across this, the organic matter is still all in place.
And what he does too is when he cuts, he's oftentimes working in front of him and he's cutting those tops and the limbs and stuff and then running on top of those. So he's getting very little soil compaction even on these trails, and I think we'll see these trails come right back, no problem.
You know, felling trees generally doesn't cause erosion. It's the equipment that causes erosion, and he hasn't drug a log here yet. You know, so this all is still in place. All the organic matter and everything is still in place.
It's going to decompose.
Yeah, he actually puts them in a little carriage in behind there.
Yeah, he has a big bunk right on
He carries
the
them
back.
out.
Yep.
So there's not a log drug in here.
Okay.
It's a machine, it's called a forwarder. So when he's done cutting, he'll actually switch to the grapple, which is to pick those trees up and load them right on the back of that machine. He'll take them down.
If you look right now, if you can see over those 3 logs that are in front of you, you can see the bunk in behind there, that gray thing. That's where he picks the logs up, and he actually sets them in there and carries them out of the woods. Huh?
They lay this
They
way.
lay the lengthwise.
Yeah. Right straight behind it, yeah. And then he can unload those and put them right in the trailer when he gets down to the land.
Hey Andy, walk over here into this top and look at the acorns laying over there. You just bend over, you can pick up handfuls of them.
Well, and that's the other thing we got was a great acorn crop this year that we're able to take advantage of too.
So we got to walk back.
That big tree there had a tremendous amount. Yeah, in order to get you back on time, any final questions, folks, while we're here? Otherwise, we'll try to get you back on time.
What's this wood going to use?
Well, like you said, he's making lots of different sorts. The wood was purchased by Gladfelter because we've sold a lot of pulpwood off of here, a lot of small, very low value trees. So we worked with Gladfelter Pulpwood Company for sale and just simply negotiated, sold it per unit. So everything that comes out, they're weighing the trucks, and then we're getting paid so much per ton.
$4.
For every pulpwood load that comes out, $4 a ton. But he's sorting out the hemlock logs, he's sorting out the oak logs and the other species, so it's going to various places that they're tracking for us. Yeah. But it was all negotiated sale. This wasn't a pay up front or anything like that, so we'll be paid at the end. So there's some trust that goes on there certainly, but when you're moving a bunch of low value junk and dead trees, it's all in a very small sale. I mean, literally we probably won't cut, with that buffer in the middle, we probably won't even cut 15 acres here.
But we estimated 950 tons would come out of here, Paul.
Times
That's almost 60 tons to the acre. And the estimate was 11,000 board feet of saw logs, and we've already cut, 3 weeks ago, we already cut 9,500 board feet.
What was the estimate on the tons?
950.
950, so about $4,000 in pulpwood on the 15 acre.
There you go.
What about the emerald ash borer? You guys have that same problem?
Yeah, we've got emerald ash borer. We've got ash starting to die pretty heavily in here. We've had two problems with ash in here. We've had ash yellow, which is like a nematode kind of thing that's been killing our ash for a long time. And now we've got a lot of ash mortality, which I think is emerald ash borer. And so that's one of the reasons we discriminated against ash in the cell. We didn't retain any ash.
We probably would have otherwise. It would have been a desirable species, but we marked them all to cut.
And there was a lot of ash regeneration on the site. So ash is still going to be a component of this.
How do you control the borer? Because like around where I live, they have like purple boxes.
That's just to find out if they're there.
That's just a monitoring track, basically, yeah. To treat them in the forest is virtually impossible, to be honest with you. You can treat some individual yard trees and things like that with insecticides, but for us out here it'd be impossible to manage. For the adelgid, which also in yard trees you can treat the ash borer or anything. So those are things we're dealing with that are going to change species composition out here, certainly.